everyone. Before we get started, I'd like to let you know that I'll be hosting a free webinar. If you've ever led a training session on DEI, you know that it can easily get stuck at raising awareness. We often focus too much on what people need to know about inclusion and equity, and not enough on how they can apply inclusive concepts. In the Amplify Your Impact webinar, we'll be showing you how you can use science-backed strategies in your own training to generate real culture change in teams and organizations. If you're interested, you can register in the link that will be included in the show notes. Welcome to Just One Q. I'm Dr. Melissa Horne, a diversity, equity, and inclusion advocate. In this podcast, I chat with industry experts and thought leaders about the latest trends related to diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace. Each episode, I ask just one question tied to current events. The goal is to leave you with the tools that you need to drive change in your own life, both personally and professionally. On a recent episode of Just One Q, we looked at the growing trend of internal job postings for DEI professionals within organizations. And while it's true that many organizations are starting to bring DEI in-house, the majority of companies are still choosing to work with DEI consultants and strategists. And if you've never worked with a DEI professional, or if your organization is looking at this option, you might be wondering, what does this type of engagement look like? Or how should you even go about finding a DEI consultant or professional? So for today's question, I'm asking, what are the most important things that DEI professionals want organizations to know? And to answer today's question, I'm honored to be joined by Dr. Nika White. For those of you who don't know, Dr. Nika White is a national authority and fearless advocate for diversity, equity, and inclusion. As an award-winning management and leadership consultant, keynote speaker, published author, and executive practitioner for DEI efforts across business, government, nonprofit, and education, Dr. White helps organizations break barriers and integrate DEI into their business frameworks. Her work has also led to a designation by Forbes as a top 10 DEI trailblazer. And really, she's the perfect guest to talk about what DEI practitioners want organizations to know about working with them. Dr. White, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure to be back in conversation with you.
I know we chatted about this on one of our earlier calls, but what is it that you think that organizations need to know about engaging with DEI practitioners and consultants?
So this is such a very important question. And as someone that's a practitioner and consultant in this space, I just really relish the opportunity to be able to dig deep into this. I think that for an organization to really have effective outcomes in terms of selecting a partner that really is going to meet their needs, they have to be mindful of some key best practices for engaging a DEI consultant. What we're seeing right now, Melissa, is that as the business world catches on to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and more consultants are hired, people are realizing that there's a strategy and guidance is needed for sustainable and successful outcomes as it relates to that partnership. And so the working relationship between an organization and a consultant is often left to chance and in the hopes that the fit is correct. And that the strategy will smoothly be enacted. But I'm finding that to achieve those desired outcomes, it is a great idea for organizations to know exactly how to engage DEI consultants. That includes what the relationship should look like, what strategic steps to expect along the process, and just level set around that at the beginning. So I tend to encourage people to first really be mindful and knowledgeable around why are you looking to seek a DEI consultant or practitioner? What are your immediate needs? And there are a multitude of reasons why businesses and organizations will determine that hiring a diversity consultant is, alignment with what they feel like their needs are.
I want to go back to sort of the first thing you touched on, and you mentioned a few times that this is a partnership. And so tell me what you mean about that, because I think we really focus on that as well as forming strategic partnerships and forming partnerships with organizations in sort of the other consulting work that we do. Learning snippets, as folks know, is we use that in partnerships with other DEI professionals and consultants. But in our sort of management consulting part of the business, we really seek to form partnerships with our clients. But what does that look like in the DEI space?
Well, I can't talk about how everyone shows up to the relationship between consultant and client partner. But for us, we definitely see it as a partnership. So I did use that word very deliberately. We see ourselves as an extension of our client's team. And to me, that is indicative of what a partnership should look like. We are bringing the expertise around DEIB strategy and execution. What our clients are bringing is the expertise around the institutional knowledge of the organization, their pain points, the culture, the climate, the appetite that they are able to articulate, they feel like the employee base and other stakeholders have for this work. And so I do think that it's really important when you are aligning with a client partner to treat the relationship in a way where you are equally vested in all that relationship entails. That could be the success stories, as well as even holding space for the complexity of the work as you're navigating it with your clients. I often like to say that when we are supporting our clients on their DEIB journey, we are doing it with them and not for them. And that again helps to align that partnership label that I think is critically important.
I want to go back to that, 'cause I think that's a really, really key point. I was having a conversation with another person, and they likened the whole thing is that you would hire a fitness coach, and you wouldn't expect the fitness coach to do the sit-ups for you, do the reps for you. They work alongside you. And similarly, I think often organizations don't realize that consultant strategists can't just come in and do the work, that it has to be done together, that you can point and you can lead and model, but at the end of the day, they can't do the sit-ups for you.
Yeah, I love that fitness analogy, and I may have to use it.
Yeah,
Dr.
so I'll have to give credit to Nancy Harris for that one.
Well, thank you, Nancy. But it's a really great analogy. And I do believe that sometimes there are organizations who are very narrow-sighted in how in which they would engage a consultant partner. And they do look for the consultant to come in and then, within just a short period of time to solve all the problems without having to be a part of any of the heavy lifting. And really the onus is on the organization, but they are being equipped by the knowledge and the expertise and the guidance and the coaching and the counseling that's happening from that deep place of experience that the consultant partner is coming from. So I absolutely love that analogy.
I know, it just made it come to life for me. I was like, that makes total sense. You would not expect someone to do the sit-ups for you.
And there are times where even in that analogy, we have to model for them, So it's not to say that we are completely taking ourselves out of this journey, but we have to not only be willing to help model and show our clients the way, but we have to also sometimes support them. And that means walking shoulder to shoulder with them. And so, I think that's important to bring to the conversation as well.
So for those folks who are just sort of thinking about, what, I think we do need to bring this into our organization. What should they be looking for when they're thinking about partnering with a DEI strategist or practitioner? What are sort of the things or questions that they could be asking to ensure that there's a values alignment and that this is going to be a successful partnership?
So I think even before you can get to the point of sufficiently answering the question around the values alignment in terms of the approach and the lens in which the consultant partner may show up to this space of DEIB, the organization has to have keen awareness of why. Why are you at this point in time seeking a DEI consultant? Because that's going to inform a lot of the other things that certainly will help lead to the final decision. Mm-hmm. So there are a multitude of reasons that, from my experience, business and organizations will engage a consultant. One of which, Melissa, could be that maybe they already have an internal DEIB leader or department in place, but perhaps the volume of work is too great at the moment. Maybe the size of the organization is just at a place and point in time where the internal infrastructure cannot sufficiently handle all of what they are desiring to impact. Secondly, businesses may not have in-house capabilities or current staff expertise, and therefore they don't have the wherewithal to execute the work. So they really are looking for a partner that is doing all the things, right? Not just supporting and helping, but doing all the things. Mm-hmm. And then thirdly, I also see, Melissa, where organizations might need specific expertise and additional facilitation to round out perhaps the current knowledge base that the internal DEI leader stakeholder group may have. I also see where businesses may have someone that's a very astute, chief diversity officer who's facilitating the work in a programmatic way but they may need an assessment or an audit to elevate the work to the next level. And
Mhm.
we know that from a research perspective, when you have a third party that comes in and facilitates that, you have greater response rate. The intel from a data collection perspective tends to be much more meaningful and useful because people are feeling more ability to be transparent. And then the last reason that I have experienced organizations considering a consultant partner is maybe they've reached a point where they are building out learning and development experiences and they need someone who has expertise in a specific content curriculum area. So I think first and foremost, before you really can address how do I vet whether or not there's values alignment, let me understand what I'm trying to get out of
Mhm.
the consultant, partnership.
Now, in terms of seeking out consultants, I know that you wrote something on LinkedIn that went LinkedIn viral, but around RFPs. And I know that, and I think that that's something that needs to be shared with folks who are looking at soliciting a DEI practitioner consultant. And if they put it out to RFP, what is that signaling?
Yeah. So there's so much to unpack with this question. And I certainly have some deep convictions about whether or not to make it a practice to participate and respond to RFPs. I will tell you that in the early years of my consultancy, when we were presented with an opportunity and invited to participate in an RFP, we most often could consider those and we would take the time. What I've come to understand though, and now, fast forwarding years into this space, is that it's not as advantageous from my perspective when you have reached a certain point within your consultancy where the volume of work that you are responsible for through your client roster doesn't really lend itself to a lot of bandwidth for engaging in this really rigorous process of answering the multitude of questions that sometimes these RFPs can be structured around. And so we tend to shy away from them these days. In fact, it's not something that's part of our business development practice. So what I will say is that, and I'm not the only one that I'm sure is of this persuasion, because I've
Mhm.
spoken with a number of DEI practitioners who also share this philosophy. If you are anticipating making a selection of a vendor or a consultant partner based upon their ability to give you and do the work up front, then it's very harmful to the space, the discipline, the industry. It's harmful to the individual. Just like other expertise that find its way into the consulting world, our strategy for how in which we would address a DEI problem or solution or opportunity rather, that is there's a cost to that. And
Mhm.
so, if we are telling you how in which we would approach the work and the strategy, then we are in essence doing the work before being hired for the work.
Mhm.
And so that's something that I tend to shun against, and I tend to educate where I can, others about, because I think that we have to protect the full turf. And then I also find that sometimes it is just a formality to actually have a formal RFP process. And in actuality, sometimes those organizations will have already identified a vendor partner that they have an affinity to, maybe because there's history there, but they know that as part of, there could be some mandate, especially if it's like a government entity, that you have to have a certain number of bids before you can make a final call. And I just find that it's not advantageous that commiserates with the time that's involved and the energy involved to actually, go through that full process.
Yeah, thank you for that. I know that I think that there are a lot of folks in the space who would say that this is, if you're asking for the work, and it's a lot of work to respond to an RFP, that if you're doing that, then there should be some compensation for that as well. And that there's also, you're paying for folks, strategy for their work. And so it needs to be a process that recognizes the work that goes into it. So I appreciate that, because I know that folks, a lot of people do put out to RFP not thinking about the implications of that. But I think knowing the discourse and discussion that's been happening in this space, that it's important that folks know that if their organization is going to be doing this, that it could have some unintended consequences and
Yeah.
impact who applies as well. So.
Yes, that point is what's critical, Melissa, because what I have come to understand is that for the DEIB consultancies that are high in demand, they tend to not have the luxury of putting a whole lot of time, nor do they desire to extend a lot of time just for a chance to be able to get business when they're pretty high in demand. And so I will say this too, because I think this is important to bring to the conversation. The reason that a lot of organizations will have a formal RFP process was really for the benefit of economic inclusion, allowing different types of business leaders and owners to be in the consideration set to help create that greater parity of opportunity. However, I feel like that is not the true sentiments in which people engage and structure the RFP process. And so I think that there are some good intentions that are out there for those organizations that leverage the RFP process, but I also think that it's time to reimagine it to be able to also address some of these other challenges that I'm seeing.
I think that, yeah, that's a really fantastic point. And if they are so labor intensive that it means that folks can't participate, then, then they're not achieving their intended outcome. One other question that I'd like to maybe get your sense on is, we're talking a lot about ROI here, the ROI of DEI. When organizations are engaging with a consultant in this space, what should they be expecting? And I think part of the work is managing expectations or setting the expectations, because as you mentioned, one reason that an organization will engage a consultant or practitioner is that there's a pain point or multiple pain points within the organization, and there's fires that are burning and they need them put out. I think we could probably both say that we know that we can address immediate issues, but if there's other sort of things causing the fire, we can put out the one fire, but that doesn't mean there's not going to be others that pop up. How do we manage expectations or set the expectations, or what can they expect?
Melissa, that comes with the discovery process, even before the partnership is fully solidified through a contract agreement where you have outlined the statement of work. And so I think that, asking the right questions on both parties' end, I am a firm believer that consultant partners are also vetting their potential clients, right? Sometimes we look at it one-sided, but no, consultant partners should be also vetting whether or not they are a good fit for the organization. Not every DEI consultancy is the same. There's different levels of expertise. And so I think the clarity comes during that discovery process. You have to be very intentional to ask lots of thoughtful questions to make sure that you're documenting what their expectations are and you're being clear to communicate where you can and cannot fall within those confines. And sometimes that means managing the client, because oftentimes clients don't know what they don't know. So they don't even know what to ask for. And in that regard, we have to make sure that as the ones bringing the expertise, we give them options, we outline those options, and we help them to feel comfortable with the solution that we are recommending. And so I think that as we try to answer the question of what kind of ROI can partners and clients expect, it has everything to do with how clear the goals and the problems and the pain points, to use your language, that they're trying to solve for. I think that is how you're going to be able to get a successful partnership. No one organization's journey from a DEI perspective is going to look the same. And so while there are some basic tenets and foundational principles around DEIB, how in which they may manifest itself and within an organization can vary based upon the climate, the culture, the people, so many different variables. And so the ROI is going to be very much a customized type of answer depending upon that discovery process.
Two things. One, I love that you mentioned discovery. I think a lot of organizations don't necessarily, there's multiple layers of discovery. We really value discovery in the work that we do in our custom projects, because often, and maybe you probably found this, is that the problem that a client might express, when you do the discovery, you realize that that's actually not, that's a symptom of a different problem. Yes. And the value that discovery can have on the outcome and the solution and the success of a project is really, it's hard to put, what am I trying to say here?
Yeah. That's why I'm a big fan also for making sure that a part of that discovery is the consultant presenting the idea and really encouraging the client to leave room for the consultant to do their own kind of evaluation. One of the first things that I recommend is let us do our own deep dive assessment or audit so that we can have a clear understanding of what's the baseline picture look like, right?
Mhm.
And then that helps us to be smarter, more effective DEI consultant partners, because now we are informed by this evidence-based data that helps us to walk shoulder to shoulder with them around a path forward plan. And so every organization is different. And you can't assume that just because you are a consultant with DEI expertise, that you will automatically be able to just walk in from one singular conversation, being able to clearly, with specificity, understand how to solve for those challenges or those opportunities. And there is a bit of responsibility too, I believe, on the partners end from a client perspective, where they need to be willing to do some preliminary internal work and come
Mhm.
prepared to that discovery conversation. Because the extent in which a DEI consultant partner can really support the goals and the desired outcomes for our clients has a lot to do with, are you ensuring that we are coming into a situation where success can be realized, right? There's nothing more frustrating to in that discovery conversation, or even the early on engagement conversations, to be told that everyone is on board, everyone supports DEI, our leadership team is ready to go. And then you have your initial conversation where you're bringing together that leadership team to align them on the process ahead. And you clearly see where there is a disconnect, there's
Mm.
misalignment. So I always say, be truthful about the reality. That's how we're going to be best, positioned to help and assist. And it's okay if the answer is that we have some that want us to go deeper, and then we have some that feels like this is a distraction. This is not relevant to who we are and what we need to be doing. And let me then determine how to best support you with the reality of the situation.
I think that's a really important point. Um, and probably a good place to sort of start to wrap up our conversation. So if we were to just sort of, um, you've covered so much ground, and it's amazing how we do that in the show. But if you were to leave our guests with sort of one key takeaway in terms of what you want them to take away in terms of if they're starting the process of looking to engage a DI practitioner or consultant, what is the one thing they really need to just think about doing?
So there's so many, but the one that I have a lot of energy around as we close out is that it is critically important to consider a DEI consultant partnership as a long-term type of relationship.
Mm.
Long-term does not mean forever, because for me, part of what success looks like is working myself out of a job with that particular client. I want to get them to a place where they have all of the foundational tenets to be able to then manage and maintain and even take the work to the next level. Then as they encounter maybe very specific challenges along the way, then they can come back and I can be of support. But generally speaking, you're not going to be able to really satisfy the desired outcomes of DEI in a short period of time with the one and done type of project experience. It needs to be something that you're committed to for the long term. And that is where you're going to really gain, great level of value. And I think that is sometimes a misunderstanding that some clients will show up to the conversations with. They're asking for one very specific thing, and in actuality, in order for that specific thing to be realized, there's a lot of other stuff that you're going to have to do before that, during it, and then even after. And so be prepared to think about it as a long-term partnership, and I think that's what's going to create this success.
Nika, thank you so much. This was a fantastic conversation. I really appreciate the insight that you brought, because I think a lot of folks just don't have that awareness around what does this look like. I think you've really given us a lot to think about, and our listeners a lot to think about in terms of even before, what are the goals? What are you trying to achieve? I know that you've written some articles about this as well. For those who are interested in learning more about your work, or interested in keeping up with you or finding your writing, where should they be looking?
Well, great question, Melissa, and thank you for giving me a chance to share today. I think the best way for people to connect with me and to take advantage of some of the courtesy resources we have available is by visiting our website, which is simply nikawhite.com. That's NIKAWHITE, like the color.com. There we have white papers, blog articles. We have a way for people to connect to what we refer to as Inclusion Uncomplicated. It's a video series that really helps people to simplify DEI. And then we also do a vodcast every Friday called Intentional Conversations. It's where we intersect topics related to diversity, equity, and inclusion with leadership and business. Melissa, you've come and you've been a part of that experience with us. So grateful. But people can get all of the replays and also sign up to be a part of our email distribution list where you'll be made aware of upcoming opportunities to engage with us and our content as well.
Dr. Nika, thank you so much for being here. As always, if you have any of your own questions or would like to be a guest on the show or are interested in becoming a Learning Snippets partner, please feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. Until next time, thank you so much for joining me. I'm Dr. Melissa Horne, and this is Just One Q.